Yeah, you'll never guess what I've done.
What now?
Only invented an invisibility serum. Yeah!
Yeah, right.
No, really. It's going to revolutionise everything. We'll get loads.
All right, where is it?
Got to admit, I can't find it. But when I do, you won't believe what I'm going to be able to do.
What?
Anything I want. Nobody'd be able to stop me. Not even you!
Imagine if you could become invisible. What would you do with this tremendous power? This is a question which storytellers and philosophers have struggled with for thousands of years, especially in H.G. Wells's 1897 novel, The Invisible Man. This is the third time we're examining a work by H.G. Wells, so if you haven't done so, be sure to check out our videos on The War of the Worlds and The Time Machine. Like most H.G. Wells stories, The Invisible Man isn't really about science fiction. That's just a vehicle for a much bigger social message. In my view, The Invisible Man is really about the nature of morality and a warning about those who seek to transcend it. In Plato's Republic, written over 2,000 years ago, is a story of the ring of Gyges. In the story, a shepherd named Gyges stumbles on a chasm in the ground which has opened up after an earthquake. Inside it, he finds a magical golden ring. This ring has the power of invisibility. With this ring, he seduces the queen, murders the king, and steals the kingdom. The inspiration for The Lord of the Rings is obvious, but there's a far deeper message here. The story is part of a wider dialogue about the nature of morality. Do we act morally because it's the right thing to do, or because we're afraid of punishment? If we had the power of the ring, would we do wrong if we knew we could get away with it? As Wells writes, an invisible man is a man of power. In the novel, the Invisible Man, real name Griffin, is a brilliant young scientist wanting to change the world with a scientific breakthrough. This he manages, discovering invisibility, but at the cost of his own moral compass. His initial crimes are done under the justification of being necessary to continue his research, either by acquiring money or protecting his identity. But it's not long before he starts using his new power to threaten and coerce. "Listen," said the voice. "The windows are fastened, and I've taken the key out of the door. I'm a fairly strong man, and I have the poker handy, besides being invisible. There's not the slightest doubt that I could kill you both and get away quite easily if I wanted to. Do you understand? Very well. If I let you go, will you promise not to try any nonsense and do what I tell you?" After his invisibility is discovered, he goes on a petty crime spree. The Invisible Man amused himself for a little while by breaking all the windows in the Coach and Horses, and then he thrust a street lamp through the parlour window of Mrs. Gribble. He it must have been who cut the telegraph wire to Adderdean just beyond Higgins Cottage on the Adderdean Road. His behaviour at this point is rather sophomoric, the type of antisocial activities usually performed by teenagers. But it's when he meets an old school friend named Kemp that things take a far more menacing turn.
"It is killing we must do, Kemp. Not wanton killing, but a judicious slaying. And that invisible man must now establish a reign of terror. He must take some town like your Burdock and terrify and dominate it. He must issue his orders, and all who would disobey his orders he must kill."
Griffin tells Kemp that, to fund his research, he stole money from his father, who then shot himself. Whilst in London, to protect his identity, he set a house on fire, with people trapped inside. Griffin is a stick of seaside rock, through which violence, selfishness and cruelty run throughout. He is mad, said Kemp. Inhuman. He is pure selfishness. He thinks of nothing but his own advantage, his own safety. I have listened to such a story this morning of brutal self-seeking. He has wounded men. He will kill them unless we can prevent him. He will create a panic. Nothing can stop him. He is going out now, furious. He dreams of a reign of terror. When Griffin discovers that Kemp has betrayed him to the police, he decides that Kemp must be the prime focus of his reign of terror.
The game is only beginning. There is nothing for it but to start the terror. This announces the first day of the terror. Port Burdock is no longer under the Queen, tell your Colonel of Police. It is under me, the terror. This is day one of year one of a new epoch. The epoch of the Invisible Man. I am Invisible Man the First. For the first day, the rule will be easy. There will be one execution for the sake of example, a man named Kemp. Death starts for him today. He may lock himself away, hide himself away, get guards about him, put on armour if he likes. Death, the unseen death, is coming.
To add complexity to this character, he's not a total psychopath like the Joker. He could very easily kill random people, but he doesn't. Everything is done under the cold rationale of either protecting his identity or pursuing Kemp. He's like the Terminator, focused entirely on the mission, and this makes him a much scarier villain. Interestingly though, he does experience remorse over his actions. When he murders a man to protect his identity, it seems to have this effect. It released some long-pent fountain of remorse which for a time may have flooded whatever scheme of action he had contrived. There's a story of a voice heard about sunset by a couple of men in a field near Fern Bottom. It was wailing and laughing, sobbing and groaning, and ever and again it shouted. So there's this interesting unresolved tension in the character between his relentless pursuit of power and vengeance and his overwhelming pangs of conscience and remorse. It's as though some part of his humanity is fighting back against the monster he's become. Griffin eventually tracks down Kemp to his house, which has been barricaded, and attacks it with an axe in a brutal and frenzied assault. Kemp and Griffin eventually fight hand to hand, and Griffin is subdued by a mob and beaten. When Kemp realises that Griffin is injured, he shows mercy to his old friend. But Griffin's injuries are too great, and he dies. In an epilogue, it's revealed that the innkeeper at the pub which Griffin stayed at still keeps some of his scientific diaries. Presently, he relaxes and leans back, and blinks through his smoke across the room at things invisible to other eyes. Full of secrets, he says. Wonderful secrets. Once I get the whole of them, Lord, I wouldn't do what he did. Well. He pulls at his pipe. So he lapses into a dream, the undying, wonderful dream of his life. The innkeeper fantasises about what he'd do with that power, telling himself that he wouldn't go as far as Griffin. But then again, like Gyges with the ring, maybe if he really did have that power, he would do all the things he secretly wishes to.
What would you do if you were invisible, eh? I know what I'd do.
Hey, we're getting to that. The character of the Invisible Man is of someone for whom the ordinary rules no longer apply. He has transcended conventional morality. Through science, he has become superhuman. This sounds an awful lot like something else. Oh right, the Übermensch. The Übermensch is one of the most famous and misunderstood concepts by German 19th century philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Wells may have been familiar with the concept. Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra was published 14 years before The Invisible Man, so Wells may have been aware of it. The Übermensch is, essentially, someone who's become the best version of themselves. They define their own values and work towards making them a reality. They're the master of self-mastery. While the Nazis interpreted this to mean a literal master race, Nietzsche meant it more to mean someone who's in total control of their destiny. The Invisible Man is a perverted Übermensch. He's mastered science, but has become so consumed by his own brilliance that he believes that he can do whatever he wants. He's no longer beholden to conventional morality. He is the one to define right and wrong, good and evil. The idea of the Übermensch may be positive in itself, but put into the wrong hands, and it can be incredibly dangerous. However, there is a counter-argument. We only have moral responsibility if we have the ability to choose our actions. If we're only acting morally out of a fear of punishment, not because we actually want to do good, but because we're afraid of what happens if we don't, then that's not really a free moral choice. But the Übermensch doesn't care about any of that. The Übermensch has transcended all of that. The Übermensch actually has true moral freedom because he can make truly moral choices. Hence, invisibility is actually a moral liberation.
I didn't get all that. Did you?
Anyway, it's pretty obvious that the Invisible Man is a warning against the Übermensch. But if we only act morally because we're afraid of punishment, that's a rather bleak outlook on human nature. Is there a philosophy which counters that? Immanuel Kant was an 18th century German philosopher who created a rather complicated system of personal morality. To keep it simple, Kant believed that a moral action is one which is performed out of personal duty, not out of a desire to get rewards or because you're forced to. So, for example, on the roadside you often see items for sale with an honesty box. There's no one around, you could very easily steal things, but hopefully you feel that the moral action is to pay for them, even though nobody's watching. This is acting out of duty, because you're doing the right thing, because it's the right thing to do. So in the case of the Invisible Man, it was his own moral failings which led him to committing crimes. If he was a good Kantian, then invisibility would have nothing to do with it, because he should still have acted out of personal duty. Or at least, that's what the theory goes anyway. Human beings are a lot more complicated than that.
Skellington's too, you know. I've done my research. I've done some of my own, I have. There's this Friedrich Hayek bloke, right? You've heard of him? Economist, isn't he? Anyway, listen to this. Such literary interpreters of scientific and technological advance, of which H.G. Wells, because of his unusually high quality of work, would be an excellent example, have done far more to spread the socialist ideal of a centrally directed economy in which each is assigned his due share than have the real scientists from whom they have cadged many of their notions. That's from The Fatal Conceit, that is.
Right, and what's your point?
Well, this invisible fella, he's the opposite of what your H.G. Wells believes in, right? Because Wells, he's a socialist, isn't he? But Griffin, he's all about money. And get this, he's not just the invisible man, he's the invisible hand.
Oh, right, I get it. Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations, the invisible hand of capitalism.
Come on, that's good, innit?
Okay, that's good, I'll give you that.
Well, I reckon, you see, for Wells, Griffin represents the corrupting influence of money. You see, he causes all kinds of trouble, disrupts the community, does whatever crimes he wants. He's like, nobody can see him because he's invisible. So, anyway, how did he get to be invisible?
Through science?
Nah, well really, through money, innit? Because he gets that money by nicking it off his dad. And the poor fella kills himself. So money's not just the cause of his original sin, it's what drives him into his reign of evil and terror and chaos and that. I reckon your Wells would say that capitalists are parasites on society. And that's all Griffin is, innit? He don't make nothing, he don't do no good for anyone. He's just an invisible man with an invisible hand nicking other people's stuff.
Well, I definitely think there's something there, you know. I don't think there's enough textual evidence to make a firm case of it, but thank you for your contribution. There have been many adaptations of The Invisible Man, and unfortunately, the vast majority have nothing to do with the original novel. Most prefer to simply have an invisible character and ignore the plot and theme of the story. Probably the most faithful and best adaptation is the 1933 film starring Claude Rains. This is a warning about powerful despots. Griffin is a Robespierre figure, a charismatic leader seeking to install his own authoritarian regime. His silk dressing gown transforms into a military jacket. He's far more violent and menacing than in the book, committing a litany of murders and crimes. The special effects are really quite incredible for the time, and so this is a highly enjoyable film which takes the book to another level. The 2000 film Hollow Man, starring Kevin Bacon, is genuinely one of the worst films I've ever seen. The kindest thing I can say is that it's thematically very close to the novel, but done in such an exploitative and self-indulgent way as to be repulsive. It relishes in the male fantasy of being able to assault various women without consequence. It's just a really bad film. The 2020 film The Invisible Man is an updated version of the story which does a decent job of transferring the themes into a modern setting. It deals with harassment, control, and big tech, creating a thought-provoking update to the themes of the original. Speaking of which, there's a rather obvious point we haven't mentioned yet. In the age of the internet, anyone can become invisible. The internet enables you to become totally anonymous, and there are many good things about this. But it can also bring out the very worst in people. I noticed a pretty striking similarity in the description of the Invisible Man to the character of Rorschach in Watchmen. He was wrapped up from head to foot, and the brim of his soft felt hat hid every inch of his face but the shiny tip of his nose. He wore a dark brown velvet jacket with a high black linen-lined collar turned up about his neck. A face of 3 huge indeterminate spots on white, very like the face of a pale pansy. Like Griffin, Rorschach embraces an anonymous identity to make himself feel powerful. Both characters also, whilst in that anonymous identity, view themselves as superior to others. Alan Moore, the writer of Watchmen, also featured the Invisible Man in his League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, so he certainly was familiar with the character. So that's the Invisible Man. It asks some complex and challenging questions about who we are and why we do the things we do. So the thing to leave you with is this. The next time you're driving down a deserted road, no cars, no people, no speed cameras, do you follow the speed limit because you know it's the right thing to do? Or would you break it because you know there's no one there to catch you?
Well, I know what I'd do. Speed. Power!
Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, do subscribe and watch some of our previous ones, and maybe share this video with people who you'd like to have moral, philosophical debates with.
Or I'll come and get ya! He seems to have an invisible touch, yeah. He reaches in and grabs right hold of your cash. He seems to have an invisible touch, yeah. He takes control and gives your head a big smash.